I'm just going to put the full recording that Father Jerry Hallen, Jesuit, gave here in Ballina yesterday. I didn't go looking to go to this talk. Somebody asked me to go have a listen and give some commentary on it. Look, I'm just going to play this. I knew what they were going to say. I knew what, basically, it kind of confirmed what we all know. What is this synodal way? What is the end result? Because you don't start a project without having the end in mind. No leader does a project without knowing, well, what do I want to get out of this project that I'm spending so much time and effort on? What do I want to get out of it? Nobody says, well, look, we're going to do this. Whatever the Holy Spirit says. No. You want something from this process. What does the Church, does the Pope, does Rome want from this synodal process? What is the end goal? What do you want to change? And we know what you want to change. We had it in the Amazon Synod. If we all remember the changes that they wanted to bring in the Amazon Synod, to have women deacons, to have married priests, it was supposedly the Pope was just about to make a change, and a couple of cardinals protested, and he kind of pulled back. He says, no, it was a bit too soon. It's a bit too soon to be making these changes. No, we need a synodal process. And we're very well aware of how this process worked in Ireland, because we had a citizens' assembly before we had a referendum. And so it's very interesting to see what he was talking about. And this synodal process, when the voting starts, it won't be just clerics. No, we'll bring in a lot of other people, and we'll have their views on it as well. I mean, sorry if I sound a bit cynical in all this. Sorry if I do. And I'm sure there are men in the church, theologians, who are much better versed than me. I suppose I'm kind of the practical person. When you see something happening, you have to say, why is this happening, and what's the aim of this action in the church? What is going on here? Because nowhere in this synodal process are we talking about encountering Christ in the Eucharist, or the liturgy, or prayer, or the Rosary. God, I mean, the Rosary, definitely not. You wouldn't hear much about it. But look, again, who am I to judge? Could be totally wrong here. Robert could be on the wrong path. But in my mind, you don't call a synod, you don't create a process without knowing what is the result I want to have in mind. And we know what the result that the Pope wants. I mean, we can just list them out. Okay, so we're going to have women deacons, we're going to have married priests, there will be possibly a change in marriage. We've already seen this in Amoris Laetitia. How far will they push it? It would be interesting to see. Where will they expand it to? I mean, these are all the topics that they're discussing. Certainly here, what they're called the hot button issues, hot topic issues. Don't know where. I mean, in my simple mind, I thought we had a deposit of the faith, and so on and so forth. I suppose, what was sin before, now we've discerned away from sin, or I don't know, just asking. Maybe some theologian can jump in here. Anyway, I'm going to play this. It's long. It mightn't be for everyone. I'm not asking anyone to listen to it all. I'm just putting on the record so that people see in Ireland what's going on, and you can make your own decisions and your own discussions on it. I mean, I went to this meeting and I heard everything that I knew I was going to hear at it. I heard nothing nothing that I wasn't expecting. It was copy paste what you have in Germany. Copy paste. Cardinal Marx. Copy paste. No difference. So I think we kind of know the agenda, that where we're going on this. Anyone that seems to be so enamored with this synodal process seems to be enamored with this agenda as well. And it's quite open, the agenda. It's the agenda that's there. So look, anyway, I'm just leaving this here so people can listen to it. And again, I said, I'm sorry if I sound a bit cynical, but I kind of feel, we're being shoehorned into accepting the results that are going to come from this new democratization of the church. The church is now a democracy, and whatever the spirit of the age that's most Catholics believe in, whatever that spirit is, that's what the church will become. Practically what the Anglican Church has done. Yeah, it's copy paste what the Anglican Church has done in the UK. No difference. He even says it in the talk. Well, synods are kind of a new thing in the church. They've been going on in the Protestant church for years. Yeah, we know that. We know that. They've been dividing themselves for years as well. Is that where we're heading? Don't know. Who am I to judge? Have a listen to this. Let me know your thoughts. If you're going to listen through to all of it, let me know your thoughts. The audio isn't great, but let me know your thoughts. Be really interested if some priest can weigh in. What are your thoughts? Am I being very cynical? Am I being, naive here? I don't think I am. I think Rome knows exactly what they want from this synod. And this is just a kind of a fig leaf charade to say, oh, look, we've consulted everybody. This is what the church, the sensus fidelium, this is what the sensus fidelium of the age wants. So, look, we have to go along with it. Be interesting. Very interesting. God bless. Take care. Bye-bye.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks very much, Peter. And thanks especially to Michael for inviting me back here again. I'm very conscious that the last time I was here was in February 2020. So a month later, COVID hit, and Anna's explained well how it affected us all and affected you in the programme that you were already embarked on. And at that particular time, I was addressing the fallout from the synod in the Amazon. Remember the Amazon synod that took place actually in Rome, but there was quite a bit of fallout from that. And I was talking about that. And I was also regretting, as I wound up the thing, that the Irish bishops hadn't yet grasped the nettle of synodality. So a year later they did grasp the nettle of synodality, and we have this process that's going on at the moment globally and nationally. Thanks, Anne, for that very clear outline of what's going on here in Killala. I think it's very impressive, and it offers leadership to the rest of the church. We're not the only diocese that has done something like this, but you've done it very, very well, and I know through Brendan, among others, some of the steps, and you've outlined them very clearly. So that's something that can be of great help to other dioceses, and it offers leadership to the church in Ireland. As it happens, the reading at Mass today was from Acts 15, and Acts 15 is the Council of Jerusalem, and that was the crisis that hit the early church when they found out that in their preaching in places like Turkey and Syria and so on, that non-Jews were attracted to the message of the good news as well as Jews. And then they were faced with the issue, did these first have to convert to be Jews to follow Jesus Christ, and did they have to observe all the Jewish laws? There are something like 613 different laws, including dietary laws, and then for males, circumcision. Was that part of what they needed to do, or was there some other way? And as you know, there was a very hot and heavy discussion. If ever there was a hot button issue, as you've described it, Anne, that was it at a very fundamental level, because that was to shape the history of the church. And it looked very divisive. It looked as if at one stage the church could split because of that. And although it's telescoped in the scriptures in Acts and in the letters of Paul as if it happened in a short time, scholars tell us it probably happened over a period of about 10 years. So it wasn't something that was resolved quickly. But at this Council of Jerusalem, there was a significant milestone reached, and that was the first council, if you like, which was formally summoned to settle a dispute which you could call pastoral, but which was also doctrinal. The two went together. And the decision was taken to, as you know, to open up the good news to the pagans, or the Gentiles as they were called, with minimal requirements of Jewish law. The decision was taken by the assembly as a whole, so it talks about apostles and elders. There were some prominent speakers. The most prominent wasn't Peter. He did speak at it, but it wasn't he. It was James who made, if you like, summarised what he felt had come out of the assembly. And the most important factor in coming to his summary was not theology, although that did take a part in it. It was experience. It was the experience of as they understood it, the Spirit poured out in the different situations that Peter himself had encountered, but particularly Paul and Barnabas at Antioch. And then the decision, which was met with consensus by the group in Jerusalem, that wasn't the end of it. It had to go back then to the people at Antioch. And they sent two to bring the message, and we're told that the phrase they use, it seems good to us and the Holy Spirit, that's a time-honoured phrase then passed down through councils, to ecumenical councils, to the Vatican II, seemed good to us and the Holy Spirit. And then the ruling was given, and we're told that the people in Antioch received this with great joy. So there was a sense of reception, confirmation of the decision taken. People were at ease with the decision. So that, if you like, is the prototype of the synodality in terms of the actual synod, the Council of Jerusalem. And you can see some of the factors involved. And we're relearning these days in the church after probably in the Western church a period of about 1,000 years where synods for the most part disappeared from the ordinary life stream of the church. Didn't in the Orthodox Church, didn't in the Protestant churches, but we, if you like, have to relearn habits of being able to speak openly and listen to one another in a civil way and make decisions on that basis. And that's what we're being asked to do. So Anne has already used words like discernment, and these are words we're hearing more of these days. So what I want to do this evening is to offer you some kind of reflection on what's been going on globally and nationally, and always trying to keep in mind what I understand to be happening here in Killala. And I presume there'll be a give and take from your own experience. You will be able to teach and lead the rest of us, and at the same time, being human, you will learn yourselves from some of the practices and some of the ideas that are coming out from other parts of Ireland and other parts of the world. So, what's the state of play, to put it that way, globally and nationally? I want to begin, those of you who've heard the interview with Monica on Midwest Radio will forgive me if I repeat this story, because I think it's a core story which illustrates at the deepest level what this is about. So there's this very impressive woman canon lawyer called Miriam Williams. She's Dutch and she professes canon law in Erfurt in Germany. And when she was a student of canon law, one of her fellow students was a priest, and he subsequently went on to be a bishop. And shortly after he was made a bishop, they met up again at some kind of a meeting. And he took her aside and he said he wanted to ask her advice. He said, look, I've become a bishop in this diocese. This diocese has a lot of very complex problems, and there's a lot of decisions to be taken. And what I've decided to do is to drop the Diocesan Pastoral Council, because in doing so, I'll be able to make the decisions quicker. And we really need these decisions to be made. It's too long to be consulting and to go through all those kind of hoops. And he said, and you as a canon law lawyer, Miriam, will know that in canon law, pastoral councils are discretionary. They're not obligatory. So what do you think? So she said to him, she said, can I ask you, do you celebrate the sacrament of confirmation as bishop in your diocese? And he said, yes. He liked doing that a lot because young people were idealistic and full of energy. And she said, do you believe these young people receive the Holy Spirit in the sacrament of confirmation? And he said, of course. And then she said, do you believe that the Holy Spirit is still at work in those people when they become adults? So he looked puzzled. He wasn't quite sure what she was getting at, but he was afraid what she was getting at. And she said, in case you do believe that the Holy Spirit is still active in these adults, how do you as a bishop become aware of the working of the Holy Spirit in these adults? She said, the Diocesan Pastoral Council is one good way of doing this. And then she said, we parted with a friendly handshake, and she wasn't sure what he thought. He didn't give her any response. But 7 years later, she met him again, and he told her then that that encounter with her had been absolutely pivotal, crucial in his ministry as bishop. Because up to then, he had looked at the negative side of consultation, that it was complex, that it took a lot of time, and he admitted also that he was afraid of the lay people. He was afraid of coming before what he had in his mind as awkward people who were going to ask me to do awkward things. And so he didn't relish that. And when she talked about the fact that these same lay people had the Holy Spirit in them, he kind of, from his own theological training, he got a different way of approaching that. And he proceeded to reinstate the Diocesan Pastoral Council. And when it came to decisions like closing down or opening schools, for example, he actually included more people. He got in students, he got in teachers, he got in parents. And what he discovered was, over his time as bishop, that though the decisions took longer because of this extensive consultation, he felt that he made better decisions and they were better received. And it was a bit like she told it as a conversion story. He moved from one position to another. The Pope often talks on this synodal pathway about inviting us all to conversion. So it's a kind of encounter. That's the language the Pope used. He doesn't use the word of relationship so much, encounter, because something happens at an encounter. We're struck by something and we go away and we think about it. We might be angry, but it gets us thinking. So that's at the heart of what Francis is about in synodality. And Cardinal Grech, Mario Grech, who's the Maltese cardinal, who's head of the Office of Synodality in Rome, when he and his assistant, Nathalie Bécard, she's a French nun, when they were dialoguing with the Irish bishops, when the Irish bishops were moving towards the decision, he said at the end, the Irish bishops were saying, I wonder, are we really ready for it? And he was saying, you're ready for it, go for it. He said, none of us are ready for it. We'll have these speed bumps and we'll make mistakes, but it's the way forward. And he was saying that when we embark on the synodal pathway, we may hope that Jesus will visit us as he did the disciples on the road to Emmaus, which is another scriptural image, if you like, of synodality. Walking together along the road, being joined, speaking, listening, breaking bread, and moving from absolute despondency, desolation, to the kind of energy and joy and hope where they can say our hearts were burning within us. So, what has happened globally? Turning again to this man, Mario Grech, I was at this symposium thing in Oxford there about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and he gave a homily at the start, and it was fascinating. This set the tone. It was a 3-day event, and on the first evening there was a Eucharist, and he presided and also gave the homily. And he took those words from Ecclesiasticus, there's a time to be quiet, there's a time to speak. And he played around with those, and he said, a synodal church is a listening church. But to listen, of course, you have to have people speaking as well. And he talked in particular in that homily about the danger of a culture of silence, or omerta, if you like, within the Catholic Church about hot-button issues. So, of course, it had to do with child sexual abuse. It had to do with the gap between liberals and conservatives. It had to do with the misunderstandings between the global north and the global south. It had to do with different liturgical preferences. It had to do with the relationship between laity and priests and bishops. It had to do with the role of women. It had to do with those who want to exclude certain categories of people from the pews. And he was referring there to various sexual teachings which cause great dissension within the church and great conflict. So it was an interesting way to start a conference coming from somebody who's a cardinal and who's leading the thing, because equivalently what he was saying was, we have been silent for too long about important issues. We need to learn to talk to one another in a way that involves speaking honestly and listening with humility. And that was one of the things the Pope, this word that we're all experts now in Greek, because he has this word parousia, or parasia, and it means speaking honestly and openly. And the Pope has been on to that from the start. And initially when he said it, and maybe still with some people didn't believe him. And the people in particular who didn't believe him were the other bishops and cardinals. So, there's a lovely quote. You remember he became Pope in 2013. And then in 2014, he had a consistory in February. And then the Synod on the Family began in March. And what he says there at that particular synod early on, he said, one general and basic condition is this: speaking honestly. And he goes on to say, let no one say, I cannot say this, they will think this or this of me. It's back to what you were saying about Killala, where was everything on the agenda. He goes on to say, it is necessary to speak with parasia all that one feels. And then he says, he had said this in March, after the last consistory, a month ago in February, in which the family was discussed, a cardinal wrote to me saying, what a shame that several cardinals did not have the courage to say certain things out of respect for the Pope, perhaps believing that the Pope might think something else. This is not good. This is not synodality, because it is necessary to say all that in the Lord one feels the need to say, without polite deference, without hesitation. And at the same time, one must listen with humility and welcome with an open heart what your brothers and sisters say. So if you like, it's from the horse's mouth. Here's somebody at the very top saying, encouraging us to be absolutely open, not to be provocative and so on. He says, in the Lord. So it's having considered it, having prayed about it, but then speaking simply and honestly. That's a kind of a ground rule. And remember, one of his 4 governing principles that came out in the first apostolic exhortation, the joy of the gospel, time is greater than space. So he has this thing about processes are so important. So of course there will be decisions and there will be gains or losses, but of absolute core to that is that one has a process where something is happening. There's listening to one another and to the Holy Spirit. And I know, listening to what you said, Anne, and hearing it elsewhere as well, that that's what's been going on. You've been quite attentive to the process here. You've gone out of your way to make it as full of integrity and professionalism as possible. You've taken time, and yet your taking of time hasn't been a fob off to people to avoid difficult decisions and to try new approaches. And there is this thing, there's a Latin tag called solvitur ambulando, and it means the problems are solved as one walks along. And it's a good tag for synodality, which involves walking along. So we learn by doing, and we learn by making mistakes as well. We don't deliberately try to make mistakes, obviously. We try to get it right, but we will inevitably make some mistakes and hurt some people and so on. And we can learn from those and pick ourselves up again. Again, reverting to Cardinal Grech, I was saying to the guys at dinner, it was fascinating to see how relaxed he was about what's going on in the German church, where they're tackling head-on issues like women in the church, power in the church, priesthood in the church. And they're doing this, as the Germans do, with great theological earnestness. And Grech was very, very relaxed about that. He said that's the German strength, if you like, their theological culture And the church needs that, and it needs to work out some of these issues at that level. Also very relaxed about Cardinal Hullerich, who's the head of the Conference of European Bishops, and who has said rather controversial things about the blessing of gay unions, about married priests and so on. And Greg considers him a good friend of his, and they get on very well together. So it's interesting to see it that at that level, if you like, in the Roman bureaucracy, to put it in those pejorative terms, there's actually great support for what you will be doing in Killala. We won't know until October 2023 what more precisely the results of this global consultation has been called by people the largest ever global consultation in history. Obviously you could exaggerate because it will be entered into with varying degrees of enthusiasm and so on, but it is happening all over the world, that's very clear. Things are coming in already. But the signals from the top and the centre are encouraging. It really comes across to me as not just rhetoric. This is intentional, it's real. There are other interesting straws in the wind globally then, which relate to some of what Anne was saying and what's going on here. Whereas in previous synods, say on the family or on young people, there was a pre-consultation, but that wasn't formally designated as part of the synod. The synod was restricted to the bishops when they met in Rome. This synod began in October 2021. So what you are doing in Killala is part of that synod in this understanding. Now that's a significant kind of, may seem like a detail, but it's a significant thing conceptually. And what may be happening is, in the church, a move from what we might call episcopal synodality, the bishops meeting together from time to time in Rome, yes, consulting the rest of us and so on. But it may be a move from that episcopal synodality to ecclesial synodality, that in some way we're moving towards the idea that the bishops will be sharing that role, that governance role, wider than just with bishops. That's even more probable when one considers that at this next synod there will be certain non-ordained people voting. Certainly Sister Natalie Baker, who is the assistant to Cardinal Greg, will be voting. The logo for the synod, as you know, is exactly what you were saying about was it Camus that you quoted at the end and so on. The bishop is not out in the front, the bishop is not at the back, the bishop is in the middle in the logo. There's a handicapped person, there's men and women, there's children and so on, and the bishop in the middle. So there's something there again, just in image form, that they're trying to help us to reimagine what's going on. The tablet correspondent Christopher Lamb, some of you may know him, he noted in March that the new constitution of the Pope, in Latin it's called Predicate Evangelium, preach the gospel. So it's a rejigging of the various offices in the Vatican, now very much with an outward focus for mission, for the world, if you like. And it's at the service not just of the Pope, but of every diocese. So it's a very different model of curia, if you like. In that constitution, that reforming constitution, it's ruled that all parts of the Roman curia, so all the other what's called congregations or dicasteries, should collaborate with the general secretariat of the synod. And it doesn't say the synod of bishops, it says the synod. And Lamb wonders again, is that another clue as to the fact that they're thinking of widening this event of the Synod of Bishops to wider participation? Up to then, Francis himself even had said the Synod of Bishops is the convergence or the high point of all the synodal activity that goes on in the church, at parish, at diocesan, at regional level. But maybe there's something else being hinted here. And in addition, as you may know from that reform document, what's coming through is that lay people, women and men, are now clearly eligible to exercise the governance and leadership of Vatican congregations and dicasteries. Up to now, there'd been a dispute among canon lawyers. There's this famous Canon Law 129, and it talks about lay people being able to cooperate but not participate in governance. And it's really put, according to some, lay governance, lay authority, Peter being head of the diocese, as I was putting his leg with Anne and Patricia. It puts this in a different context now, because whereas before, some canon lawyers, ironically the German school, had a very tough interpretation of that. They said that leadership and governance in the church is dependent on orders, it's dependent on being ordained. Ironically, the Roman school of canon law was much more liberal and said no. And the Australians, when they, in their plenary council recently, when they were looking at this whole thing, they came up with this document, Light from the Southern Cross. And they imagined lay people in very strong leadership and decision-making roles. And they took a liberal interpretation of this Canon 129. The Pope in this document is clearly saying that lay decision-making is in accord with the participation of all the baptized in the office of Jesus Christ as King. So there's Jesus Christ as priest, as prophet, and as King. And King refers to governance. And by baptism we all have a share in those three offices, if you like, or three duties of Christ. And the Pope, for the first time, is making it very clear. One of the ones who went out at the press conference to enunciate this was a guy called Gianfranco Irlanda. He's a canonist at the Gregorian. He's a Jesuit. I know him. He's considered a very conservative, very orthodox. He was from that kind of school, impeccably orthodox. And he articulated at that press conference that the Pope's constitution now shows that authority to rule comes from what's called canonical mission, applicable to suitably qualified baptized people, and not from the sacrament of orders. So that's enormously significant again. The ramifications will be debated by canonists for some considerable time, but what it does is, I think Anne mentioned it in her piece, it's a shift from what the Dominican theologian Yves Congar had talked about way back in the 1940s and 50s. He talked about, using metaphysical terms, the ontological priority of baptism. Baptism is what we all have in common. That's the most basic reality. We are all brothers and sisters together of Jesus Christ through baptism. Orders comes after that. And this is reasserting that kind of vision. And I think as a result we may expect a flourishing of lay ministries at local level, as well as lay participation in a more shared model of leadership and governance, and I think you are experiencing the beginnings of that here. Just note finally at the global level, 2 Vatican documents. They're not easy reads, the Vade Mecum as they call it, and the preparation document, but they're both interesting from the point of view of the vision. Just looking at Ireland then, very quickly, when they announced the synodal pathway in March 2021, the bishops were very interesting in that they set out the context. So as well as the context in terms of the Pope's very inspiring encyclicals or apostolic letters, they also looked at Ireland and they talked about secularization, the scandal of abuse, calls for transparency, accountability, participation and leadership. They talked about peacemaking with view to Northern Ireland, a culture of welcome with a view to immigration. They also talked about reconnecting with young people. They talked about honouring the contribution of women and addressing their concerns, reaching out to the marginalised, those on the peripheries, the disaffected, and all that in the context of the huge decline in vocations to priesthood and religious life. Their question at that stage was, what does God want from the church in Ireland at this time? Then the Pope came in May and formally in October of the same year and announced the Global Synod, which its focus was on synodality and asking each parish and each diocese, how are we working together as church and what more are we being asked to do? And so it was a kind of difficult to put those two together, and particularly difficult maybe for dioceses like yourselves, which were already a good bit along the way. And so there have been various attempts throughout Ireland to kind of weave the two together. It's a bit untidy, it's a bit unfocused, and yet something is happening in each diocese. And we can see that on the steering committee. So on the steering committee, just to give you a very brief thing, there's 22 people on this steering committee. The chair is a young married lay woman, a political scientist, Nicola Brady. There are two vice chairs. One is Bishop Brendan Leahy, and the other is a married man, Andrew O'Callaghan. There are three other bishops as well as Brendan Leahy, Martin Hayes, Michael Reuter, and Paul Dempsey. There's 11 women and there's 11 men. So it's an interesting group from the point of view just of its composition, and with them is a task force which is doing the day-to-day thing. And there's Eamon Fitzgibbon as a priest and three lay women on the task force. We've had 7 meetings to date, only one of them in person. And a subgroup of us is meeting down in Maynooth at the end of, the beginning of June, when all the reports have come in. And we're spending 3 days doing a discernment process, trying to get to the essence of what's being said, so that on June the 18th, down in Athlone, on a Saturday, when all the delegates come together from the different dioceses, again we hope to have something like 300 people from various different groups, we will begin to fashion the report that will go from Ireland. We won't finalise on that day, but we'll begin to do so. And later in the evening we'll go out to Clonmacnoise, where there'll be a liturgy, not a mass, a liturgy, out on the site of the monastery in Clonmacnoise. It's hard to say at the moment how well or precisely what's happening. You get the impression, and you'll know yourself, it can be somewhat patchy. The different parishes, even within a diocese, never mind different dioceses, are often asking different questions. So the data will be quite difficult to collate. One of our members is Niamh Horrigan. She's a professor of sociology at UCL. She tells us again and again to respect the integrity of the data, even when it's coming from different questions, if you like. So somehow our task will be to try and bring that together and to send it back for more discussion before anything is finalised. At the conference in Oxford, the main participants there were leaders, delegates from the different dioceses in England and Wales. So you had about 40 people there who'd had experience. And they were saying very often there was apathy, very often there were small numbers, very often it was difficult to reach out to the margins. But they were also saying, it's happening, it's real, it's the only show in town, there's energy around it. So it was interesting. I didn't get at all the impression that these were people who were fooling themselves. They were in touch with the downside of what was happening, but they were very, a bit like you were saying about the 2 meetings where you really experienced that kind of joy and energy. That's what was happening. And they reported one person, for example, he was a 70-year-old man, absolutely tears coming down his face saying, you know, I'm 70 and it's the first time in my life they've asked my opinion of anything to do with the church. And he was very pleased about that and very happy that it had happened. So that's going on. I think myself that what's likely to happen is that this will be a first round, if you like, that will have the great value of doing the kind of training you're talking about, where people will have learned facilitation skills and so on. But the second time, when we're focusing more on Ireland, we'll be able to go into greater depth on what needs to be done, and we'll also have a better attempt to reach out to young people, to people who don't come to church for one reason or another, the disaffected, among whom may be groups of those who've had an experience of abuse from the church. And if that issue is somehow not addressed, then I think we're really missing something, because it's a huge obstacle in the way of the church restoring any kind of trust and credibility. I'm going quickly now because I realise we're coming to. Let me just signal, underline 3 issues that are important. The first is this, that at Vatican II, there were several new ideas which came forward, which were left in the end. Miriam Williams expressed it, and Ormond Rush, the Australian, has the same phrase, juxtaposed rather than integrated. So, for example, in the Decree of the Church, you had chapter 2, which called the Church the people of God, and chapter 3, which talked about the hierarchy, which had been the image. And after Vatican II, those two weren't integrated, and a lot of the time it continued on, particularly under the papacy of John Paul II and Benedict, as if the hierarchy was still the Church. Similarly, in Vatican II, in the Decree Dei Verbum on revelation, faith and revelation, there was this idea of faith as propositions that we give to assent to certain truths, the deposit of faith. And there was this other idea of faith as a personal relationship with the mystery of Jesus Christ, as it might be with your partner or your husband or your children, another person. And those two were left side by side without being integrated. And very often what you had was technically what's known as a focus on the Christological over against the pneumatological. So focus on Jesus Christ, the Word, the external leader, and very little focus on the Holy Spirit who's inspiring us and who's helping us to interpret the Word. And very often it meant quite a severe attitude towards, we say theologians, or Tony Flannery, for example, in Ireland, who wouldn't consider himself a theologian, but who had views about things and who was treated very, very strongly, if you like, very harshly. What's happening now is that they're beginning to get integrated. And it's very clear what's happening is that the priority is being given to baptism. The priority has been given to the local church, in communion, of course, and in communion with Rome. And so you have that kind of stress, and Benedict himself was one of the first to articulate it. Christianity is not, first of all, a set of doctrines or an ethical principles. It's the mystery of an encounter with a person. And so we're being dragged back to that, if you like, a basic thing that we see every day in the Gospels and that we learned as youngsters, and that I was in the cathedral this afternoon and there was adoration and there was a dozen people there, and what were they doing? They were, like, it's just very impressive. I was saying to the guys who was at Glencairn Abbey last week, 29 women, and they come together 6 times a day for the office, and wouldn't be my cup of tea, I'd hate it. They start at 4:10 in the morning, and there's cantors and singers and so on, but there's something very beautiful just about their faith. And they're warm people, they're intelligent people, and so on. So we're being brought back to try and examine our own relationship with Jesus Christ and learn to talk about it and learn to articulate that. Then the second thing I wanted to say is, Peter, you mentioned discernment, and it's mentioned a lot. And spiritual conversation is another word that's used, and we're taught techniques, if you like, for spiritual conversation. And it's very important because we're trying to focus on what people are saying and what the Holy Spirit is saying through those people. Sometimes it's interpreted, though, as meaning that we must leave aside our own deepest thoughts and our own deepest convictions, as if they're all bias. So leave those to one side, but listen, that's not discernment. So it's to get that right. It sometimes can be interpreted when the Pope says, don't engage in a parliamentary style, and bishops immediately latch on to that and they say, let's not have discussion and debate and people majority voting and all that kind of stuff. There's a truth to that in the sense that at some stage in the process there needs to be this prayerful listening in the way that we're learning now, relearning. But at other stages there needs to be ordinary cut and thrust of trying to work things out. And Francis himself, when he was looking at the Synod in Amazon, said it didn't reach the level of discernment on those hot button issues. But he said it was too parliamentary. But he said, but that was a rich and necessary parliament. So it was a phase of the whole thing. The North American ecclesiologist Gallardus talks about that. He said at a Vatican Council, at an ecumenical council, you have saints and sinners, you have optimists and pessimists, you have gossip, you have lobbying, you have cut and thrust of debate, and in the middle of all of that you have the attempt to rise above it with the Holy Spirit and to discern. And so in our own process here in Ireland, there will be times when, as in Vatican II, the bishops, for example, used to gather at afternoons or in the evening times with groups of theologians, or in the off periods when the council wasn't meeting during the summertime and so on, they tried to inform themselves better. So that has to be part of what we do, and there's a Jesuit called Brian Grogan and he talks about noisy discernment, and in some sense that I think is true. Secondly and finally, there's a nervousness still, and I detected this at Oxford, around the tie-up between synodality and teaching, doctrine. And the bishops again latch on to something that the Pope said in the book with Austin Ivory, where he said that the purpose of synods is pastoral, it's not to change traditional teaching. Now you could debate for a long time what counts as traditional teaching. But the same Pope also said that when he was introducing the changes with the acolyte and the lector, he said that this is due to a doctrinal change that has emerged from synods. So he actually affirmed that. We know from Vatican II, if you take a decree like the Declaration on Religious Freedom, how big a teaching and a change in teaching that was. The Pope's own footnote in The Joy of Love about divorced and remarried people is another example. So this is a nervousness in the Catholic Church around this phrase called the development of doctrine. It's a good phrase to use here because it's Cardinal Newman. And so we always like to see development as a linear thing. It's a straight line thing. And in a recent piece in the Furrow and that book that I gave Brendan, I have a longer article. It's a book out by Aidan Conway and Eugene Duffy and Mary McDade about synodality and with different contributions. And in it I try to argue that there has historically been changes in church teaching, that some of them are quite amazing when you think about it. The one I took in the Furrow article was the fact that the church solemnly taught for centuries that the man was the head of the woman in marriage, and backed that up with strong scriptural reference. And then that was up to 1950. 1965, 67, it said marriage was a reciprocal, mutual, equal relationship. Didn't mention any of the scriptural texts. And then in 1987, Pope John Paul II repeated the teaching of Vatican II and reinterpreted the scriptural text in all of Genesis to back up that teaching. Nobody said at any stage we're changing the teaching. Nobody said at any stage we're even almost reversing the teaching. But the teaching had developed in that non-linear way, if you like. And so there are examples of that, and that causes, I think, nervousness. And again, going back to the International Theological Commission, who issued this was under Gerhard Muller, you recall, who was head of the CDF at the time, another man who'd be, if you like, on the very traditional side of the wing of the church. And that document said, A key resource for determining doctrine in the church is the sense of faith of the faithful, the sensus fidei fidelium. That's the spontaneous response of the Christian. And again, Newman was big into this. He had this famous essay on consulting the faithful in matters of doctrine. And he talked about the conspiratio, it's a nice word, it's the breeding together, but you can see conspiracy as well, breeding together of the faithful and pastors. And when there's a unity there, you can be sure the teaching is good. And this document then, this International Theological Commission, says where there is unease among the faithful or disquiet or what's technically known as non-reception. Supposing after the Council of Jerusalem, when the two were sent to Antioch to give the news, Antioch had been disturbed, and it says, that's not what we're looking for, that's not our experience. But then they would have had to go back and talk more. And what this document is saying is, where there is a discordancy between church teaching and the sense of faith of the faithful, there could be three possible reasons for it. One would be that the teaching is not being well communicated. And that's the usual answer that the Irish bishops give. They told us after the consultation on the family that a lot of people thought that church teaching on sexuality and on gender was out of touch. And what they said in response to that was, we understand that, but we now redouble our efforts to communicate that teaching better. The second possible reason would be that people have got soft, they've got lax, they've given in to the spirit of the age, and this is not Christianity. But the third possible reason is that the teaching itself has been formed without sufficient attention to the experience of the people, and because of that needs to be reconsidered. I think that's the point we're at with some of these teachings around sexuality and gender, and it would be a pity if we avoided that issue. They didn't avoid that very tricky issue in the early church, and it would be a terrible pity if we were to avoid it. Let me just finish then, going back to what I started with in a way. The bishops locate all of this in a good way, I think, in the context of what's happening in Ireland and the deep secularisation. I was floating a kite with those at the dinner beforehand, and again, I think it was Patricia around beforehand out there, that maybe something is shifting in Ireland too. I know you wouldn't think so if you look at the present discussion in the Dáil and so on about the maternity hospital. There is a lot of visceral lack of trust and hostility to the church in Ireland at the moment. And we have to say a lot of that is deserved, and that's part of the reason why we need to change. But down the road, there's Sally Rooney, and I believe the conversation with friends is turning out to be a bit long-winded. I didn't watch Normal People, but I read Conversation with Friends, I read Normal People, and the mention of religion was absolutely peripheral. And I read Beautiful World, Where Are You? And the mention of religion is absolutely central. The characters have moved from being in their early and middle 20s to being in their early 30s. And they're saying equivalently, is this all there is? And whether it's in terms of giving a foundation to Marxism or to give a foundation to sexuality, because it's like all the characters now think they do everything sexually, there's no problems. But then you kind of say, well, but what's all that? The character's still not happy. So there's something there that's happening, which is backed up by research done by Dr. Sandra Cullen in Dublin City University, formerly Mater Dei, who's saying that there's a shift in the cohort of young people in the group from about 18 to 30, that as opposed to those between 30 and 60, we'll say, who are still very angry and still very alienated, the younger cohort, there are signs of being intrigued by what religion and spirituality have to offer, and even what the church has to offer. So listen, let me finish. I think very often older people, and particularly priests, I count us among those, find change difficult, and very understandably. But you know, for older people, what I have discovered is if they're grandparents, what does concern them is that their grandchildren and even their children aren't practicing anymore and find the church absolutely irrelevant. And that causes concern. That we'd love to be in a position to have a church that mediated better. It was a light to the world, as Vatican II talks about, rather than being something that they're ashamed of. And so I think, and priests as well, priests were very idealistic when they joined very often, and now they look back and they see a lot of their work being derided, and so it's not an easy place to be. Look, we're being offered a wonderful chance here. It's like we're in the boat on the sea. It's being tossed up and down. Peter's called to walk out, and he doubts. And are we going to reach out and grab the hand? Are we going to go at Seamus Heaney, do not be afraid? Are we going to believe what the Pope said in the Phoenix Park and what he said in countless other places over the world, that we can hope for a new Pentecost, a new outpouring of the Holy Spirit? And that's, I think, basically what we're asking to happen. And following with that, a new institution, new structures, new laws, which will better mediate the love of God for humankind. So for me, I think it's a time of great hope, and I really would encourage you in Killala to continue this kind of work, because the bad news is this is not going to stop at the end of this summer. This is a new way of being church, and it's something that we're invited to. Nobody has to do it. You're being invited the way Jesus invited his early disciples. We're back in that space. And I do believe that that's revolutionary in terms of what has gone on over the last 40 years in our lifetime. And there's something really new happening, and it's exciting. So it's great that you're already embarked on it. And I look forward to seeing the fruits of it over the next few years. As I say, when we focus more particularly on what's happening in Ireland and get the feedback from Rome about that dialogue goes on. Rome isn't the last word. It's a word we respect, and particularly if it's coming from around the world. But there'll be a to and fro, and that's the way it's going to be. So thanks very much for that.